안녕하세요, 여러분. 코치조입니다. 반갑습니다. 즐거운 하루를 보내셨나요? 한국에 계신 분들. 네, 그리고 Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had awesome day. 자, 오늘의 운동을 하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘은 다리 가슴, 다리 가슴, 다리랑 가슴이랑 어깨, 다리 가슴 어깨. 자, 오늘 따라라리라 따라따따. 네. 다음에는 머리를 다르게 잘라야 되겠어요. 머리를 좀 이상하게 잘랐어요. 네. 머리를 좀 제대로 자르겠습니다. 비타민 C도 좀 먹고. 웬만하면 이런 쉐이커도 스테인리스 스틸이나 그 다음에 스테인리스 스틸이나 뒤에다 놔야 되겠다. 오디오를 잘 안 쓰니까. 자, 오디오를 뒤에다 놔야 되겠지. 스테인리스 스틸이나 스테인리스 스틸을 씁니다. 웬만하면. 저는 이런 스테인리스 스틸이나 아니면 유리로 된 거를 씁니다. 아침에 일어나서 물 한 2리터 마시고 커피, 집에서 오가닉으로 된 커피 내려서 커피를 두 잔 마시고 공부 좀 하고 운동하러 나왔습니다. 이렇게 해서 어제 제가 마지막 식사를 5시, 지금 현재 공복 시간 12시간입니다. 되게 많은 분들이 공복 12시간 힘들어 하시죠? 피검사 할 때. 저는 지금 공복 12시간인데 운동을 합니다. 공부랑 경제 공부도 하면서 운동을 하도록 하겠습니다. 경제를 공부를 해야 될 것 같아요. 경제를 공부해야 돈을 벌려면 돈은 일단은 직업으로 벌어야 되고 그 돈을 불리려면 경제를 알아야 되는 것 같아요. 그래서 저는 요새 경제를 공부를 하고 있습니다. CNBC. 오케이.
Look at the NASDAQ. Tech futures up 136%. I mean, it's been weak. What's changed besides the calendar? Well, maybe nothing but the calendar, but that might matter. Because remember, if you're with friends tonight and someone says, what's the best month of the year for the stock market historically? You're going to say, hey, it's April. That's right. April historically the best month to buy stocks. Over the last couple of decades, the averages tend to gain about 2% in the month of April. Kind of a fresh start, a lot of new buying by fiscal years, mutual funds, etc. Now, of course, that's history. Doesn't mean markets will rise this year. Every year is different, but we're up 15 of the last 20 Aprils. So if history is any guide, and it tends to be, this could be a very good month for stocks, and we're not fooling around. Well, speaking of stocks, it is time now for a special holiday short week edition of our Insider Buying Exclusive, where we look at companies with the most buying their own stock by corporate insiders. All the data coming via insiderscore.com with our thanks, and because the week itself is short, we're going to shorten this one too as well, and bring you the top 3 stocks where we've seen the most insider buying. And a reminder, these names we've brought to you the last 6 months have been generally outperforming the overall markets. So pay attention. Are you ready? All right, let's go. The third biggest insider buying this week took place at a company called Green Brick Partners. It is a $1.5 billion market cap Dallas-based home builder focused on the hot states of Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Colorado. The director there buying $430,000 worth, his largest purchase yet. Note that another insider had a big buy last week as well. Second most insider buying this week, Vizio Holdings. That's right, this is the TV maker based in California. A board member there buying $735,000 worth of VZIO. And the biggest insider buy this week, by far, was a huge $12.5 million buy by Designer Brands chairman Jay Schottenstein. This is the owner of companies like Steinmart and DSW Shoe Warehouse. So really a big bet on retail by the very rich chairman of Designer Brands. So there you go. Your top 3 insider buy stocks this week focused on housing, throw in a TV, and buy yourself some new shoes in your new house while you're watching TV. All big bets on the consumer. There you go. By the way, I'm off next week, so the insider buy will return on Friday the 9th. We'll see you then for it, but of course we'll see you before that on Worldwide Exchange, but you get the idea. All right, now the latest on that huge vaccine mix-up involving Johnson & Johnson. And mix-up may be a very nice term. Bertha Coops has more on that. Some of your other top stories this morning, really a kind of a sad story out of that lab, Bertha, on the vaccine.
Yeah, Ryan, mistakes happen, but this one with very big consequences. The New York Times reporting that human error at a manufacturing plant in Baltimore run by Emergence Biosolutions led to the destruction of approximately 15 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. Remember, that is the full dose, 1 shot. The Times says the mix-up has delayed future shipments of the doses in the U.S. while the FDA investigates. In a statement, J&J says its quality control standards helped identify the batch that did not meet its standards, and the batch was never advanced to the finishing stages of the manufacturing process. Still, the error is going to affect future doses. It doesn't affect any doses currently being delivered and used nationwide, including shipments that states are counting on for next week. Google is planning to ramp up efforts to reopen its offices. CNBC has confirmed
세연님
that
안녕하세요.
will start coming back to offices in a limited capacity starting this month, adding it will put limits on remote work starting in September.
아,
And Compass raising $450 million in its downsized initial.
세연님 운동하세요?
SoftBank-backed real estate tech firm
운동 수험생이어도
down from its initial target of
하루에 운동을
$6.
푸시업 1세트
trading on
그 다음에 뭐야 턱걸이 스쿼트 1세트라도 해주세요. 아무리 바빠도.
Watch that later on. Right.
Either way, we've got an actual IPO and not a SPAC. Kind of amazing, Bertha.
Exactly. Didn't price quite the way they thought, but you know, some of these have looked a little frothy to start out with.
Yeah, well, at least they're priced, so we'll give them that. Bertha Coombs, thank you. See you in a bit. Right, well, speaking of buying things, President Biden helps you and maybe some wavering Democrats buy into his new $2+ trillion spending and infrastructure plan. Now, there's a lot in the proposal. You probably don't want to read it, so that's why we're here. We made it simple. Here's how that record spending plan would break down on a very macro level. Road, bridges, and other transportation-related items getting about $621 billion. The Make in America tax credit to encourage domestic manufacturing, about $480 billion. Home and community services, about $400 billion. Various housing incentives, $213 billion. Water, broadband, and education, $211 billion. That is the spending side. Now to pay for it, the president proposing a host of new tax increases on U.S. businesses. They are as follows. Raising the corporate tax rate back to 28% from 21%. Raising taxes on overseas profit. A new minimum tax on so-called book income for corporations. Ending most, if not all, fossil fuel tax subsidies and cutting down on offshore deductions. The plan, by the way, would also include the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. It would make it easier for workers to start and join unions. And it was quiet. Any planned jump in individual tax and family rates that was not mentioned in the president rollout. We just got corporate taxes, nothing on the individual side just yet. So let us dive into what we do know with Andy Blocker, Head of U.S. Government Affairs at Invesco. Andy, thanks very much for joining us. We got, a couple of Democrats who are saying, let's be careful on the tax side. They mostly come from blue states. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, he may hold a lot of the cards along with Kristen Sinema. Do you think the plan, as we know it, will pass?
Well, Brian, great to be back with you. I think you're asking the right question. So, first of all, unlike the COVID-19 package, which pretty much passed as Biden proposed it, this is a proposal. It's just that. And so, even Biden's, all of his spokespersons have said, look, we want Congress to work this through. They're going to work closely with them because they understand that while 80% of the American people favor infrastructure, when you get the detail, it gets a little tricky, especially when you talk about how you pay.
Yeah, corporate taxes. Now, I will say this, Andy. The corporate tax rate proposal, 21 to 28. 21 was brought big time down by Trump. It won't be 28, will it? I mean, even if that does pass, you've got certain tax incentive, Make of America tax credit, stuff that I've been reading from smart folks like yourself and others suggest it would probably be more like 25 or 26% effective once certain tax credits are thrown back in. How do you see, if this passes, Andy, how do you see sort of the ultimate tax rate playing out?
So I think there are two things here. I think some definitely Republicans have been wanting the corporate tax rate, but some Democrats have said, look, I don't really want to 5%.
밥 맛있게 드세요, 세연님. 밥을 맛있게 드십시오. 밥을 맛있게 드세요. 밥을 먹을 때 나와 내 건강에 도움이 되는 음식을 드세요. 이 음식을 먹어서 나한테 좋고 이 지구의 건강에도 도움이 되고 이 세상 모든 사람들한테 도움이 될 수 있는 음식을 드세요.
Around this, you say, well, I don't like it or I love it, whatever it may be, but I want to make money off it. How do we do that?
So we have the COVID-19 relief package, which is a huge infusion of cash in the market. Over $1 trillion going to be spent by Q1 this fiscal year. This is a longer-term job creation spend. So you got to think about where that money is going to go, all construction that's going to be done, all different things, and you got to be a long-term player at this point with an infrastructure bill. There's not going to be this big boom at the beginning when this thing passes because the money's not going to spend that fast. So we're looking at a longer-term value play on that as well as growth.
Andy Blocker, all the best going, Andy. Always a pleasure to get your insight and time. Have a great long weekend, Andy. It's going to be a busy one for you, I suspect. Take care.
Thanks.
All right, you're welcome. Well, the White House wants to raise taxes on companies to pay for infrastructure. An unbelievable new report coming out of the federal government on unemployment insurance fraud. And the numbers, they're massive. Eamon Jabber's been following this story. He joins us now. Eamon, I posted a graphic from a story in the Washington Post yesterday on my Twitter that shows about 10.5% are officially unemployed according to the government, but 18 million Americans are receiving unemployment checks. How?
It's a great question. Part is fraud, and part of what they call improper payments over the Department of Labor. And you get the sense now that the U.S. government is just beginning to get its arms around the scale and potentially enormous scale of the problem with fraud in all of this massive spending that the government has engaged in over the past year to boost the economy. A lot of money is moving fast and low, and it gives a lot of opportunity for fraudsters. Take a look at these new numbers now. This is from the Department of Labor's Inspector General, and they issued an updated report yesterday in which they said, as they're trying to calculate the potential for fraud here, that historically, over the past several years, the improper payment rate for unemployment insurance has been higher than 10%. That's over the past several years, and if you apply that to the $896 billion in unemployment insurance funds as part of the CARES Act, you get a figure of about $89 billion of the funds that could be paid improperly as a result of that just sort of benchmark. But what's worse than that, and that's a huge number, they're also saying that their initial pandemic audit year
세연님 저는 진짜 음식만 먹어요.
will be higher than 10% because of all of the unique situations surrounding
저는 진짜 음식만 먹어요.
They're saying that the benchmark of 10% is probably going to be a little bit worse than that. They also say, Brian, that they've got
저는 인스턴트 안 먹어요. 세연님, 저는 인스턴트를 안 먹습니다. 1년에 한두 번 먹을까? 네, 저는 진짜 음식만 먹어요. 진짜 음식. 진짜 음식. 진짜 음식. 2000년 전부터 있었던 음식 위주로 먹어요.
Okay, I get it. The 10.5 million number is probably low. People jumping out of the workforce, they don't follow the paperwork, they aren't looking for a job because of the pandemic. They're just saying, you know what, I need to stay home.
저는 진짜 음식만 먹습니다. 딱 봐서 아, 이거는 이거, 저거는 저거 알 수 있는 음식.
There are literally probably millions of people simply ripping off the government and fellow taxpayers right now. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's probably right. I mean, you're talking about $89 billion. It's a huge number, and it's going to somebody in this country, right? I mean, when you talk to the Department of Labor and you look at their reports, what they're saying is that this falls into a couple of buckets. One of the biggest buckets for unemployment insurance fraud is simply people not reporting when they get a job, right? So they've got the unemployment insurance, and they go out and find work, and they don't report it back, and they double dip. That's relatively common in terms of the types of fraud that they're seeing. Some other types of fraud are people who are not actually looking for work when they're supposed to be, or people, ultimately who have got the solution somehow and are still collecting that money. So this is a problem that the government sees on a regular basis. It's just much bigger now because of the enormous and vast scale of the numbers that we're seeing.
This, I mean, you think about that, $89 billion, and we're talking about raising all this money through various tax sites. Maybe they could just cut down on some of that fraud. It would help pay for some of the stuff that we want to do. That's, I guess, though, even if we want to say it,
Yeah.
the good news is most of that money probably goes right to the economy, right? I mean, it's probably spent right away.
Yeah, like if you're all you're worried about is stimulus and the macroeconomic picture, all that money is getting respent. So it's doing something in the economy. But if you're concerned about it from a social justice perspective, you think that people don't necessarily want their government to be sending a lot of money to the wrong people, just as a general measure.
세연님 술 음식이에요 술이.
Well, you throw in another 25 or 30 billion a year.
세연님이 건강 음식에 대한 개념이 없는데
100 billion a year.
술 음식이고
Remember when that was real money, Eamon, but I guess I'm just old. Eamon Jabbers, thank you. Really important story.
저는 희석주 안 먹어요. 소주 같은 거.
Thank you.
소주가 만약에 증류수면 모를까. 제가 먹는 술 맥주.
Alright, as we head to break.
그다음
The top stories, Elon Musk been
와인,
tapped by the board of
종종.
integrity of the UFC and the Miss Universe contest. Companies moving forward with an IPO after scrapping plans
하루
in 2019 also happening.
반잔에서 한 잔.
Apple used Tesla's battery packs to store energy at its solar farm in Northern California. Apple announcing they were yesterday, but did not mention Tesla in the unveiling. And Miley Cyrus
반잔에서 한 잔을 먹습니다.
give away $1 billion for the stock. A latest example of stocks getting pop culture cred. Cyrus said she needs to move to help promote investing among her fans.
술 음식이에요
There
술.
you go. We're back after this.
술이 하루에
113.
술이
Be a great start to the April.
반잔에서 한 잔은 음식이고
Back after this.
소주 희석주는 여러분 음식 아닙니다. 독입니다. 독. 희석주는 독이에요. 그래서 희석주는 소주 증류수는 하루에 뭐 한두 잔 먹어도 되겠지만 희석주는 독이죠, 독. 그래서 관람만 하지 마시고 운동 좀 하세요, 선생님. 아셨죠? 운동. 뭐 스쿼트를 한다든지 푸시업을 한다든지 운동을 하십시오. 오케이? 그래서 훌륭한 공무원이 돼주세요. 우리의 조국과 민족의 무궁한 영광이 될 수 있는 그런 훌륭한 공무원이 돼주세요. 공무원 되면
All right, time now for a daily vaccination update. Here we go. All right, over 150 million doses administered, 97.5 million people receiving at least one dose, 55 million fully vaccinated. That means 21% of the population over 18 has been fully vaxxed. Also, over 50% of people over 65 have been vaccinated. Now, yes, there's a lot of talk and attention on cases rising in states like New Jersey. Here is the stat that matters the
New
most.
Jersey.
Hospitalizations, they're down
New
70%
Jersey.
in just 3 months. There are almost no young people in the hospital anywhere in America. Just
New Jersey.
1% for 1 The number of fatalities in nursing homes down 96% from their highs. So there's some good news from the fight against COVID. All right, on deck, Joe Funk, Zor Capital's going to lay out his business plans for the rest of the year with NASDAQ futures up 137.
안녕하세요, 박정희님. 네, 오늘 3시에 일어나서 일찍 나왔어요. 요새 일찍 일어나지네요.
Yes, I think it will be a strong month. Over the past 6 weeks or so, we've seen two different markets where
일찍 자니까 일찍 일어나는 것 같아요. 어저께 8시에 잤어요, 저희도. 8시에 자서 8시에 자고 3시에 일어났어요. 알람은 보통 한 5시에 맞추는데 일찍 일어나죠. 그러니까 꼭 일어나야 되면은 일어나기 싫은데 아침에 꼭 안 일어나도 되니까 일찍 일어나죠. 그리고 요새 몸이 별로 안 피곤하니까
Okay, on semiconductors, and I mean on semiconductors, unintended joke, that's one of your favorite picks right now. What's it got on? I love the tire sector. This is a great company that is starting to shift from their low margin businesses to more profitable businesses such as automotive and EV. They are technically very strong. They are expected to increase their earnings 90% this year. And there was also some unusual option activity yesterday where there were over 4,000 May 40 calls bought. So overall, I like this picture and I like the sector as chips are going into more than just PCs and smartphones. They are really an economic indicator. Who is Vericel and why do you like them? I love the medical products sector. Vericel, believe it or not, is kind of a reopening play because a lot of elective surgeries were postponed last year, and they have cell therapy products that are involved in repairing patients' tissue. So think
저 저녁에 한 8시에 어저께 잤어요, 졸려서.
cartilage and regrow it and implant it back into the patient. Also with skin for burn victims for repairing skin and so forth. again, technically, it's a very strong stock. They recently upped their guidance in their last earnings. They have no debt. They are running at strong profit margins, and I think this is a stock that can be up 30 to 50% over the next year or so. Wow, big call there. Vericel on semiconductor. Joe Fahmy likes the return to growth, if you will, in the best month for stocks last 20 years. Joe, thank you for coming on as always, buddy. Getting up early, we appreciate it. Take care. Thank you. All right, you're welcome. Well, that does it for us here at Worldwide Exchange, and for me, for a while actually. Tomorrow's Good Friday. The markets are closed, and I'm off the next week, so I will see you back on April 12th. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good holiday, good Friday, good Easter. Squawk Box is next. I will see you in 2 Mondays. Take care.
일찍 잤습니다. 졸려서 일찍 잤어요. 졸려서 일찍 잤습니다. 졸려서 일찍 잤어요. 졸려서 일찍 잤어요. 25, 30 이렇게 해볼까? 뭘로 하지? 35 덤벨로 할까? 덤벨로 해보겠습니다. 덤벨로 해서 이제 이렇게 해서 위에다가 이를 매는 거야. 이렇게 하고 얘를 에이 안 할래 이렇게 안 하겠습니다. 그냥 들고 해야지. 들고 할게요. 들고 할게요. 이거를 어떻게 하면 잘할 수 있을까? 이렇게 잡을까? 이렇게 옆으로 해서
Good morning. A major indices all closed the gains in the first quarter. We'll be ready for today's kickoff of the second quarter and opening day. President Biden making his pitch to pay for a $2 trillion infrastructure plan by raising taxes on corporations and a lot of other details and reactions straight ahead. With Johnson & Johnson vaccine shipments on hold after a mix-up at a production plant contaminated 15 million doses. Thursday, wait, April 1st, or is that an April Fool's? No, it is Thursday,
Hey.
1st, 2021. Squawk Box begins.
Welcome to Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. And we're going to start with markets this morning like we do every morning. But this is an interesting one. The first quarter is in the books. And check out these returns. The Dow was up by 7.75% for the quarter. The S&P was up by 5.8%, and then the Nasdaq was up by 2.8%. Sounds pretty good, but if you really break it down just over the month of March, that shows you what was really happening with this shift out of technology and into industrials. For the month of March, the Dow was up by 6.6%. The S&P was up by 4.3%. Both of those averages now up 4 out of the last 5 months. But the Nasdaq for the month of March was only up by 0.4%. So the Dow up by 6.6%, the Nasdaq up by 0.4%. Explains a little bit of that rotation that we've been watching over the last month. If you take a look this morning at the U.S. equity futures, you're going to see some green arrows on this April 1st. Yes, April Fool's Day, as Joe mentioned. Green arrows across the board, down up by about 70 points for the futures. Yeah, there we go, up by about 68 right now. S&P up by about 70, and the NASDAQ futures up by 135. So some strong performance there for the NASDAQ. And by the way, the NASDAQ yesterday was the big performer, a very big day. A gain of, I think, about 1.4%. If you check out the Treasury yields, you're going to see this morning that right now it looks like the 10-year is yielding just at 1.716%. And I guess, guys, just the idea that the 10-year has reined in, it didn't get pushed higher, it went up to 1.78% or 1.8%. That has really been the strength for the NASDAQ yesterday and then again today. What do you guys think about the squawk set, Joe?
I didn't, actually. I'm just trying to make sure I don't get fooled by something now that I've been more.
I know, I was trying to think of a joke that I could pull over on you, but I knew that you'd be wise to the ways of this.
No, it
Something
wasn't.
better than that stupid VW joke.
Yeah, I wasn't until I read it, but now, on Twitter and stuff, I'm gonna take everything with a grain of salt. I like what you said at the top of the show, that we're gonna talk about the stock futures like we do every day, but this time it's gonna be interesting. I like that.
No, I say the same thing every morning, and this morning we'll get right to the stock futures, which we do every morning, at least for the last 15, 16 years, maybe, I don't know.
Andrew, does the New York Times do anything April Foolishly or anything in that Sorkin household? I mean, were you aware of April 1st?
You know, I was going to do this a little later because I don't know if she's watching the show. I think you may know this. Today is my mother's birthday on April Fool's Day.
Oh.
Always been the case.
Happy birthday,
in a
Mrs.
Sorkin,
Sorkin.
household. So if both of you have met my mother, I believe. So happy birthday, Mom. We love you, and this is not April Fool's Day joke.
And if my mom's birthday is tomorrow, we always consider that she misses her birthday on by a day.
I'm thinking, don't you have a
What's
grandmother?
that?
I was thinking, Andrew, that you have a grandmother too, don't you?
I do, who turned 103 years old
That's
2
awesome.
months ago.
That is awesome.
Very, very lucky
Yeah.
duck I am to still have a grandmother.
That is great. I'm gonna read a story coming up. I was hoping they'd come out and say that was all an April Fool's joke when he was talking about it. So I don't think he's done that. This is
Well, let me tell you, we can unpack it.
just tell people ahead that this is, if they're waiting for the end where you say, I'm not serious, it's not gonna happen. This is for real. Yeah.
This is not a Volkswagen turned Volkswagen situation.
Wish it was.
President Biden outlined his $2 trillion infrastructure plan yesterday in Pittsburgh. $621 billion for transportation infrastructure, including roads, public transit, ports, airports, and electric vehicle development. Now, $300 billion would go towards drinking water infrastructure, broadband access, and electric grids. Another $300 billion would go towards affordable housing and upgrading schools. $580 billion would go towards manufacturing, research and development, and job creation efforts. Here's how the president says he plans to pay for it.
We're gonna raise the corporate tax. It was 35%, it's too high. We all agreed 5 years ago it should go down to 28%. But they reduced it to 21%. We're gonna raise it back to 28%. No one should be able to complain about that. It's still lower than what that rate was between World War II and 2017. Just doing that one thing will generate $1 trillion in additional revenue over 15 years.
And in particular, President Biden also singled out Amazon for not paying federal taxes.
In 2019, an independent analysis found that there are 91 Fortune 500 companies, in the world, including Amazon, to use various loopholes so they pay not a single solitary penny in federal income tax. I don't know, that's just wrong.
And in response to that, an Amazon spokesperson pointing to the American tax credit as a loophole that Congress intended that was made permanent in 2015, signed by President Obama. So, the beginning of a debate about not just the infrastructure itself, but of course, the tax implications for corporations, and of course later this year we're expecting to see higher taxes on individuals as well. Becky?
I think the problem with that explanation is, look, if you think there are loopholes that companies are using, the solution isn't to raise the corporate tax rate, punish the people who are actually paying what they're supposed to be paying. The solution is to tighten the loopholes.
Doing that too with the global, which is higher than any other, other countries that talk about a global, like AMP, and they talk about like 12%. What's it do, 21%?
We haven't seen the details on this, but I'm imagining that they probably are going to try to close, I don't know if we'll call them loopholes or whatnot, but I imagine there may be an AMT or something in the United States that comes with this 28% as part of it.
This is what
Tighten
gets
the
me.
loopholes. We call them loopholes, but sometimes there are things they have asked corporate companies to do. Like, are you going to get cuts for research and development? Are you going to get cuts for building plants in the United States and employing people here?
Right.
Do you consider those loopholes, or do you consider those things that you are doing to try and motivate companies to spend on the incentives that Washington is deeply for? That's the problem with it.
This is why I think but there is an element where you could get to a point where you do have an AMT of some sort. I think I don't know. Maybe you think that's a fair thing to do. I think at a certain level of company bringing a certain amount of profit, a real profit, you think maybe an AMT would work. The other thing we talked about, I think a week or two ago now, I think you guys actually talked about it. I think I watched you guys because I was away a week ago. Just how much money is. I happened to be watching. Just how much money has been left on the sidelines because we don't do audits. We don't do audits privately of companies. We don't do audits of individuals. There's something like $1 trillion lying around that if you just got that $1 trillion, you'd be exactly.
Right, the avoidance versus evasion issue.
You guys are talking about it in the context of avoidance versus evasion. I think that those studies, because I actually went back and looked after I was watching, I think it's evasion. I think we're talking about education, and I think that you go have an IRS that was actually on the ball.
For the avoidance, you change the law. So what the way that it gets to where the avoidances are being abused. One thing, let me just point this out, and the journal has a couple of, and I know it's Rupert Murdoch, blah blah blah, but the journal has a couple of op-eds today that just have some real numbers here. Dan Clifton, we have him on. I'd like to get him on today to talk to him if we can. But this polls very well. Infrastructure polls very well because we all think roads, highways, bridges, traditional public works polls very well. Let's do it. Do you know how much goes towards that again? Out of that 1.9 trillion, 115 billion.
Yeah.
115 billion. 115 billion for the 1.9 trillion goes for what everybody is being sold as the infrastructure bill.
Look, I would believe infrastructure also includes things like broadband at this point, because I think it's vitally important
It
for
does,
businesses to
but
have broadband.
when you think of traditionally as infrastructure, we all hear about things. You talk about it a lot yesterday. The bridges are falling apart. Airports too. That's another 25 billion for airports. You think of that. Ports and waterways, another 17 billion for that. But we're still talking about a small part of the 1.9. And maybe we need charging stations. Jennifer Granholm was going to make that point at Waffle Houses, which I've said they'll pitch in probably too. Waffle Houses and IHOPs, I think we cover the entire country, probably. Maybe with some White Castle for lunch. This disturbing yesterday, was it not? When you mess up a vaccine
Johnson news, yeah.
Shipments of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine doses are on hold while the FDA investigates a contamination at a production line in this country, in Baltimore. The ones made over in Europe. The Baltimore plant was run by Emergent Biosolutions. It makes vaccines for J&J as well as AstraZeneca, and workers are accidentally mixed up ingredients. This is not April Fool's. Contaminating up to 15 million doses of J&J's vaccine. None of the doses ever left the plant, though, and that lot has itself been quarantined. Weird word to use for the vaccine. J&J said it was strength and control over the Emergent Biosolutions work. By the way, that stock, as you can see, down sharply, down 8% on the news.
You know, the good news on this was that they caught it. These controls were in place. They caught this before it even went out. It seems crazy, the idea that you could accidentally mix things up and ruin 15 million doses. But the good news is they caught it. This wasn't like the situation with the Oxford AstraZeneca when they were realizing after the fact, after they dosed all those people, that, oh, it was a mistake, but it actually turned out to be a beneficial one. So how fortunate that we came down this path. The good news is the controls were in place and they caught it. And it wasn't making people feel pretty good.
It didn't work or it was dangerous? Or both? That's the thing. The right messed up vaccines here. It wouldn't work and give you immunity or I think the former. I think
Either one's a terrible situation.
either one or in both.
You go out. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, when we come back, some stock picks that could benefit from President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. We've got some names you should consider next. And Frontier Airlines is pricing its IPO at $19 a share. That's at the bottom of its expected range. We'll talk to the CEO, Marty Biffle, ahead of the company's first trade. That's coming up in the 7:30. Barry Biffle is coming up in the 7:30 half hour. Squawk Box will be right back. America's $2 trillion infrastructure package yesterday. The plan aims to try and revitalize U.S. transportation systems and manufacturing, among a lot of other goals too, including spending more than $600 billion on transportation and more than $200 billion on housing. Joining us right now to give us a couple of stocks that might benefit from this plan is Marianne Montaigne. She's a portfolio manager at Radiant Investments. And Marianne, watching these things today, I guess the question becomes, we knew this money was coming. We knew that infrastructure spending would start. A lot of these stocks have run up in advance of that. Are there still places that you think this hasn't all been factored in, or maybe some good places to put your money?
Yeah, this has been about 2 years in the making, and so a lot of them did start to run with the elections last fall. And so, yeah, there are still a couple that we think are interesting. The Union Pacific is one. They're going to haul all the materials and the supplies to wherever the project is at. And they would benefit not only from the volume, but also from the fact that, you know, with all this anticipation, they've been working on their efficiency, so we should see good margin expansion with that.
I was just going to say, UNP has been on fire. That stock has really taken off. It seems to be operating very well, just aside from any of these funds that would flow in.
Right, yeah, it's run, but we still think there's more room to run. Another one along those lines is Komatsu, and like the larger Caterpillar, they're a very big manufacturer of heavy equipment, and they're also benefiting from the expansion that's going on over in China in the mining industry. So that's one that we still like. And a third one is one that's probably not on a lot of people's radar, and that's essential utilities. So this is not your coal-fired typical electric utility like a Duke or a Con Ed that we stay away from. Rather, this is wastewater treatment. And there's $60 billion going toward pipes and wastewater treatment. And there's just a lot of potential left in this name. 60% of their EBITDA comes from wastewater management.
You said you'd avoid names like Duke Energy and Con Ed. Why is that?
Yeah, they're more the coal, the old style electric generation. And we're just
안녕하세요, 여러분.
more renewable.
좋아요 좀 한번 눌러보실래요? 좋아요.
And Marianne, just in terms of things you might be on the lookout for, things that you might be concerned about if you start to see this bill get eaten up a little bit in Congress, if there's not agreement, if the Democrats don't stay together in terms of what they plan to push through?
Yeah, I think it's more of a timing question than anything. So it'll give us the opportunity to go back and work on our spreadsheets. But I do think the Democrats want to put some more social aspects into this bill, and that may delay things for a while. That would be my biggest concern, is this is just going to drag on for a while.
Even if it does get passed, I think the plan is for some of this money to kind of dole out over time too. It's not necessarily going to be this flood of money that hits the market at these levels immediately.
Yeah, you know, the $2.3 trillion headline is very attractive and exciting, but the timing is really lengthy across many of these projects. So it's not something that we have to chase today, but those are three names that I think are good solid names to hold.
Marianne, thanks for your time. It's great talking to you today.
Thank you, Becky.
Andrew?
Enough thanks, Bex. When we come back, Compass making a public debut today, but raises some new questions about whether it's a tech company or a real estate company. Robert Frank joins us next to explain. Right now, though, that break, take a look at crude prices. We're right back after this. Welcome back to Squawk Box. This morning, Compass is making its Wall Street debut. Compass says it is changing the way real estate is sold. And Robert Frank joins us now with a look into the secret to Compass's growth. And it has been quite remarkable to watch the ride of Robert Redford, who founded that company now several years ago. When he first came on the show, Robert.
이 사람 운동하는 사람 같아요. 이거 봐.
Yeah, no, an incredible rise and just an incredible story for Refkin as well.
딱 운동하는
Compass,
사람
though,
같아,
pricing its IPO now
딱
at
목 보면 알 수
$18
있어요.
a share. That was originally
저 사람
expected
운동하는 사람 같아.
$23 to $26, also reducing shares being sold. So we'll now be raising about half of the $900 million it originally projected, its market value falling from about $10 billion to around $7 billion, though it could be slightly higher if you include employee options. Investors are question whether Compass is truly a tech company or more of a traditional real estate firm, and a focus now on whether it has been growing by outspending competitors for agents and whether that is sustainable. And look at its operating losses totaling $900 million since 2018. It says in its SEC filing that we may not achieve or sustain profitability. It gives agents a larger share of commission than other firms, over 80%, and it has paid bonuses of 6 or 7 figures to attract those top brokers. Now, Compass has nearly quadrupled the number of principal agents, overall agents now to 19,000, with revenues growing by about the same amount. Now, if you look at a lawsuit filed by Realogy, it claims Compass is stealing client information, listings, and trade secrets, and offers compensation packages to competitors, employees, and real estate agents that are so inflated, Compass is sure to operate at a loss and not just the short term. Compass calling those claims and that lawsuit part of a war of misinformation. Andrew, we'll have to see later today when those shares actually start trading how investors feel about this.
Robert, you've hit on what has been the big question around Compass since its founding, whether it really is a technology company or whether it is more of a classic real estate company, and again, the economics of that growth plan. As you said, they have spent an enormous amount of money attracting agents all across the country, and you know what the sustainability of that looks like. Thank you for the report. We're going to have the opportunity to ask some questions directly to the CEO of Compass. Robert Redford is going to join us right here on Squawk Box this morning. That's going to happen at 8:40 a.m. Eastern Time. Joe?
Speaking of IPOs, and I was just seeing whether we were okay with this. You know, Ari Emanuel, we both are represented by Endeavor. Did you see what's going on, Sorkin? We have three. Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the biggest supporter. And they're going to buy in the board. They're going to buy in UFC, too, which is held up, the rest of it, which is held up really well. We'll have more on it later coming up, but interesting. Elon Musk, where'd that come from? President Biden, President Biden making a pitch for $2 trillion in infrastructure spending and a tax I paid for it. Reaction from Republican Congressman Jason Smith. You might not like all of it. We'll see.
Good morning. Welcome back to Spot Five. Let's take a look at U.S. Equity futures this morning, about 3 hours before. About 52 points higher right now. Nasdaq up about 128 points higher, and the S&P up about 16 points. None of that, at least at the moment, is an April Fool's joke. Joke.
No, but it's early.
Right, it's early.
But it's early. President Biden unveiled a $2 trillion infrastructure proposal yesterday, calling it a once-in-a-generation investment.
We're creating millions of jobs, good paying jobs, and grow the economy, make us more competitive around the world, promote our national security interests, and put us in a position to win the global competition with China in the upcoming years. It's big, yes. It's bold, yes. And we can get it done.
Joining us to talk more about it is Representative Jason Smith of Missouri. He is the ranking member of the House Budget Committee in the Show Me State. So he showed us, President showed you yesterday. What did you take away from what you were shown, Congressman?
It's great to be with you. You know, of the $2.3 trillion so-called infrastructure bill that you laid out yesterday, less than 6% of the spending in that bill actually goes towards roads and bridges. Less than 6%. But then less than 5% is actually going to rural broadband. So it's very similar like the prior Biden bailout bill, where less than 9% went to shots and crushing the virus. Less than 6% is going to roads and bridges. Republicans would be happy to have an infrastructure bill that actually went towards roads and bridges, but that's not what happens here. We are, in my opinion, really entering an uncharted territory here with this level of spending. If you look at just the $2 trillion the president proposed yesterday, that will be 4 times what the country spent to build the entire interstate highway system. That I think should concern anyone.
What's most concerning to you? What's it's being spent on, or how it's being paid for, or
I think because the fact that we're proposing $2.3 trillion of spending here, and that's 4 times the amount what we spent under today's dollars for the entire interstate highway system, yet only 6% of that entire $2.3 trillion, like I said, is being spent for roads and bridges. That's scary. If you take the proposed plan with the prior $6 trillion that's already been spent in the last year, that's more spending than the total combined wages of all American workers. That's a huge problem. And then you go into the tax front. The taxes that are proposed are the largest tax increases in the history of the United States. And if you look at how the taxes will work, you talk about what country will benefit, countries like China and other countries like that, because it will increase our business rate to be higher than that of communist China.
Congressman Smith, the figures that you're citing are kind of hard to get. They spent, this is going to be 5 times as much as what was spent to build the interstate highway system. That was back in the 50s, 70 years ago. Is that based on inflation-related comparisons, or is that just straight up what they spent versus what we're proposing to spend now?
No, it's based, and it's 4 times, not 5, but it's 4 times the amount of what would be the today's value of building the interstate highway system with inflation and everything. So that tells you how disturbing it is.
Congressman, there's a lot of green stuff, and you know the journal has its own take on things. That this is Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' fingerprints all over this, or at least a big wish list of what's in this, which is something that probably is not. You know, you can argue about that, but at least that's the point that's being made. Part of the green initiatives, which I think is interesting, is the journal says they want that the president wants to force feed green energy on the electric grid. And that's all fine and good, and the transition is all fine and good. But it's going to take a lot of new high voltage capacity power lines to transport solar energy one way and wind energy back the other way. And we can't get out of the first few pages of regulatory issues with environmentalists without even doing it. So the act of actually trying to transition to green energy is going to probably be very difficult, given that it's going to take a lot of infrastructure that is going to be blocked by the same environmental groups that would supposedly embrace it.
It will be very difficult, but this is supposed to be an infrastructure package about roads and bridges. That's what Republicans and Democrats, I think, could work together on in a bipartisan way to actually make sure that we rebuild our nation's highways and make sure we address our locks and dams. That's extremely important. If you want to talk about energy, I think it's less than 10% of all of our dams actually generate power. Why don't we do that? That would be a very safe, clean way to generate power that can help in a lot of instances. But that's not what this bill does. And I think that if Republicans and Democrats got together and work on that policy of roads and bridges. Now, when you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars going towards, Medicaid, in this bill, that's unacceptable. Whether it's hundreds of billions of dollars going to housing, it should not be an infrastructure bill. That should be a separate piece of legislation.
How many terms have you served, Congressman? Is this been there a while?
I was elected.
I don't know if you know how things you should know how things work. So a lot of these tax increases that we're seeing, are they the high end of what where we'll end, so that maybe Manchin or Sinema or some of the more moderate House members, there will be compromises down to pretty big increases. In other words, maybe it's not 28, but 25 is still going to be a higher corporate tax. Maybe they don't get everything they want on some of the other taxes, but will that give Manchin and Sinema, those two senators, cover to support this? Because it's going to be a 51, right? It's going to be probably no Republican. The president's not, I don't think, is interested in anything partisan. I don't know how many times he said that might just be my opinion, but it's going to be reconciliation, and it's going to be 51-50. So you're going to need every single Democrat. Is that what we're going to see?
It looks like that it's going to go through reconciliation, just like what you said, as the prior bailout bill. But what I'm actually hearing from the Democrats who I serve with, whether it's on the Ways and Means Committee or throughout Congress, is instead of going down from 28%, they actually are talking about it being raised higher. Because every 1% that the business rate is increased, it generates about $100 billion in revenue. And so even the proposed tax increases that they have in this bill, which are the largest tax hikes in the history in the United States, it still doesn't pay the $2.3 trillion spending that's also proposed. So if they try to pay for the bill through revenue enhancements, whether these tax increases, they're going to have to increase taxes in other ways. But then you're seeing a lot of discussion where Democrats in the House are threatening to hold up this legislation if they don't eliminate the $10,000 cap on the SALT deduction. That's a lot of conversation that you're hearing from the other side. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation, and taxes are definitely in play in all different forms.
I don't know if it's the biggest tax increase in history, but since 1963, some people are, it exceeds the Clinton. We're talking about it all day long. So what district, what are you near? You near St. Louis or Kansas City?
I represent God's country. It's like what I like to say. It's southeast Missouri. It's 20 miles south of the city of St. Louis to about 10 miles east of Francis. It's what we call the Boot Hill. Actually, home of Rush Limbaugh.
Cardinal. Okay, it's over there.
Huge Cardinals fan and a Chiefs fan, so you gotta love them.
You got it. You're expanding the state. That's good. All right. Yeah, you can't pick a favorite team. We appreciate your time.
Great to be with you all.
Joe, when we come back, we're going to be talking much more about these issues we've been following, watching the markets, watching the futures. And there's a new report that says Micron and Western Digital made the bidders for one of the biggest makers of flash memory. We're going to talk about that. Micron shares up by about 3.8%, down slightly. This is a company that I think Bain Capital has been running. So we'll have more on that in a moment. Also later, real estate platform Compass set to debut on the New York Stock Exchange today. We're going to be talking to the company's CEO ahead of that IPO. And a reminder, you can watch or listen to us live anytime on the CNBC. Welcome back, everybody. Take a look at the U.S. equity futures on this first day of April. You're going to see right now green arrows across the board. Dow futures up by about 52, the S&P futures up by 16, and then there's the NASDAQ, which is up by 131 points. This morning, shares of Micron are jumping. Earnings for that company coming in at 98 cents a share. That beat the street's estimates by 3 cents. Revenue also beat expectations, and the third quarter guidance was better than expected. The company decided to switch to 5G and higher demand for its products as people work from home. Those shares, as you can see, up by about 3.75%. Separately, Micron and Western Digital are each said to be exploring a potential deal to buy Japan's Kioxia Holdings. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Kioxia makes flash memory chips. It was spun off from Toshiba back in 2018, and it's currently held by PE firm Bain Capital. It actually canceled plans for an IPO last September. It cited the pandemic and market volatility, but you know about the shortage that we've been seeing for all of these chips, the real need for semiconductors, and that is why you see things like this happening, a real desire to get your hands on more of the manufacturing processes for those. We do have some breaking news just out from Pfizer. Let's get over to Meg Terrell. She's got that news. Meg, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. A couple pieces of news from Pfizer this morning on its COVID-19 vaccine, following up on yesterday's results in 12 to 15-year-olds. The first headline I'll tell you about is that they have data from a trial in South Africa of their vaccine, and it shows very strong protection there. Now, this was a small number of participants, 800 people in this trial. They saw 9 cases of COVID in South Africa, but they were all in the placebo group. 0 cases in South Africa among people who got the vaccine. Those cases, and they found that 6 of 9 of them were in fact starting B1351 variant. And so, early data that really showing potentially strong protection from the Pfizer vaccine against this variant. Remember, we've seen diminished protection from other vaccines like Johnson & Johnson and Novavax against the B1351 variant, and there's so much concern about this. The NIH has actually already started a trial updating Moderna's vaccine tailored to that variant. These data suggest the original vaccine to cover it. However, science is going to continue, and these are small numbers. Now, the other part of the news from Pfizer this morning is that they have 6-month follow-up data on their phase 3 trial on their COVID-19 vaccine. And essentially, that's enough data and follow-up for them to file for full approval with the FDA. Now, 6 months out from the second dose of the vaccine among 46,000 participants, the vaccine efficacy is shaking out to be about 91.3% effective at 6 months. Against severe disease, depending on how you measure it, it was either 95% or 100% effective in preventing severe disease, guys. So the vaccine continuing to look good, including against these concerning variants, guys.
I think that's great news across the board, especially the idea that this is stuff that prevents infection even with those variants that are out there. The idea that the efficacy after 6 months still looks pretty strong, but maybe not quite as strong, does that lead you to think that, yes, we will end up taking either booster shots or getting the vaccine again on an annual basis?
It's really not clear at this point. I was talking to Dr. Fauci about this on Monday. How long do these vaccines look like they're going to last? And he was saying, well, we know they last at least 6 to 8 months, but that's only because that's how long they've been following these vaccines. And so they just have to follow them out and see how long that protection stands up. Not everybody believes we're going to have to get annual COVID shots the same way we get annual flu shots. It might be less frequent than that. We'll just have to see how these vaccines hold up and how the virus changes. We may end up having to get future COVID shots, and maybe they'll be co-formulated with flu shots, but we just don't have those answers yet.
Quick, how long would it take for them to file for FDA approval? How long would it take the FDA to officially declare it approved? I ask in part because I know a number of business leaders who've been waiting for that, in part because there's been a conversation about whether you could mandate vaccines for return to the office and whatnot. And the view is that as an emergency authorization, there's been legal advice to some that you can't, but that if it was fully approved, that you could.
Yeah, full approval seems to be very important for that. I've talked with legal scholars who don't think that emergency use authorization means that it's illegal for employers to require the vaccination, but it certainly is unpopular. That's something we've absolutely been hearing. In terms of how long it can take the FDA to look at this, typically, 6 to 10 months for an FDA review. However, they've already reviewed a lot of these data on the vaccines, and so we've heard about Pfizer getting close to filing.
안녕하세요,
We've heard about
미소님.
Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. However, analysts I've spoken with think that all of them could potentially be fully approved in the middle of this year.
그냥 꾸준히 열심히
Fall as universities go back and as employers
열심히는
start to
모르
go back
하여튼
to
저는 컨셉이 꾸준히 한 중간 정도만 이렇게 열심히 안 하려고 그래요. 왜냐면 열심히 하면 지치니까 오래 못 하는 거. 저는 그냥 보통으로만 하자. 보통으로 꾸준히 하자가 저의 목표입니다. 열심히 그러니까 최선을 다해서 열심히는 안 해요. 왜냐면 최선을 다하면 되게 힘들어서 오래 못 하는 것 같아요. 그래서 저는 최선을 다하지는 않습니다. 저희 목표는 한 70-80% 정도만 열심히 하자. 그 정도. 그게 저희 목표입니다. 운동은 제가 할 수 있는 능력의 한 70에서 80%만 하자. 식단은 한 80에서 90% 지키자. 잠자는 거는 한 80에서 90%로 잘 자자. 그게 저의 목표예요. 그러면 오버롤 한 85 정도로 좋은 것 같아요. 몸이 건강하고. 건강 점수 한 85점에서 90점 맞으면 좋은 것 같아요. 피 검사하면 저는 한 90점 이상 맞는 것 같아요. 제가 봤을 때.
Welcome back to Squawk. Dozens of black business executives in America calling for corporations to fight restrictive voting laws. This is a call for action. What we have heard from corporations is general statements about their support for voting rights and against voter suppression. But now we're asking, put those words into action. And we're asking corporate America to publicly and directly oppose any discriminatory legislation and all measures designed to limit America's ability to vote. Joining us right now to talk about corporate America's power when it comes to climate change and things like ESG American Electric Power Chairman and CEO of the quarterly Just Capital Call that's taking place this afternoon. A lot of news made by Ken Frazier intentional yesterday. The governor of Florida coming on our air, pushing back, and Tom Cotton taking to Twitter saying he's getting a debate right here on Squawk Box as it happens with Ed Bastian and others. What was your reaction yesterday to the call by those leaders, Nick?
Sure, Andrew. I really believe, obviously, many CEOs of the Business Roundtable and others agree that it's a fundamental principle of democracy to be able to have presidential voting. So, obviously, we don't want any discriminatory action related to that ability. And certainly, as we've seen in recent years, it's really important to be flexible in terms of the ability for people to vote, because there's so many different ways that the economy is working today, different hours, different conditions. We really do have to work on that principle to make sure that the person voting is in fact that person, but we don't have to be so restrictive that we're actually closing down people from being able to really access that right to vote.
You could give us your initial take on the infrastructure plan. Of course, this infrastructure plan calls for a big boost in the electric vehicle market and the grid, of course. A lot of money being spent there, $174 billion for the electric vehicle grid, $100 billion
Andrew, there's a lot there, obviously. Lot really to focus on the details of what's going to happen going forward. But obviously, we're very happy with the
왜
focus
이렇게
on
무거워?
electric vehicles. That's a great thing. We're actually
35가 무거워요. 그래서 30으로 하겠습니다. 무거워서 안 하겠습니다.
To take away the range anxiety when electric vehicles come into play. So that's a very positive thing. Also, from a climate change perspective, our industry has been focused on the conversion to a clean energy economy
한쪽씩
for
해야지.
years now.
한쪽씩
That
하겠습니다.
process, AEP alone,
한쪽씩.
certainly has reduced our carbon emissions
한쪽씩 해야지.
by over 70%. So
한쪽씩.
we're going to continue that further. Now, we put out
한쪽씩
these targets
하겠습니다.
of being net zero by 2050.
한쪽씩.
The challenge in the infrastructure bill will be
한쪽씩 하는 게 허리에 부담이 들 가요.
which for our
그래서 한쪽씩
our
하겠습니다.
customers as a direct charge and direct flow through of those costs to our customers. In the midst of that, to accelerate the clean energy transition so quickly that you're being really not very efficient from a capital perspective. We've got to be very careful to ensure that our customers not only have a resilient, reliable grid, but it also remains affordable.
Yeah, some of it doesn't make sense economically without the help. And as you don't have corporations don't pay taxes, people do.
Right.
But how hard is it to get regulatory approval, given the green lobby right now for all these things that you want to do, the paperwork and everything else? And isn't that, counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish by the same people?
Certainly there's challenges with that because obviously they're thinking about their affordability relative to customers. And when you think about the last time when the Obama we spent alone, we spent $9.2 billion on scrubbers and SCRs, which eliminated SOx, NOx, and mercury from the emissions of our coal-fired power plants. Well, that's really the undepreciated plant balances that still exist that customers are paying for. So if you think about those kinds of long-term capital decisions that are being made, it's going to be incredibly important for our customers to be able to respond to that ability to make that transition.
Nick, we appreciate you joining us. We had a conversation there. We'd love to have you back. We should tell everybody the quarterly Just Call, it's the Just Capital Call with American Electric Power takes place this afternoon. That's going to happen at 1 p.m. So we'll return to 2 big hours ahead right after this.
그래서 여러분 저처럼 이렇게 쉽게 운동하시면 그러니까 이거를 보고 열심히 한다라고 생각하시는 분들이 많이 계실 거예요. 근데 저는 지금 제가 할 수 있는 능력에 한 7에서 80으로 하고 있어요. 그럼 부상도 안 당하고. 그래서 저는 제가 지금 못 만들고 있거든요. 이렇게 쉽게 운동하면 운동을 길게 해야 돼요. 길게. 그러니까 저보다 쉽게 운동하시는 분이 몸이 많이 좋아지려면 저보다 더 오래 해야죠. 근데 일반인들 시간 없잖아요. 그러면 좀 기대치를 좀 내려놓으세요. 한 3개월 바짝 하려고 하지 말고 한 1년, 2년, 3년 잡고 하려고 하세요. 그러면 항상 즐거워요 운동이. 아 맛있다 이거. 진짜. 정말 맛있어 이거. 딸기맛.
President Biden unveils his $2 trillion infrastructure spending plan. We'll look at how it could
이거 너무 맛있어서
whether your taxes
저
are
이제
going higher.
그만 주문할 거예요.
The Archegos fallout widens. The SEC reportedly opening an investigation.
이 회사께 좀 덜 맛있거든요. 그래서 이거 먹기로 했어요. 저는 너무 맛있는 걸 웬만하면 많이 안 먹으려고요. 되게 맛있는데 건강에 좋을 수가 있을까요? 없어요. 그래서
Reopening of America as the second hour of Squawk Box begins right now.
되게 맛없는 걸 맛있게 먹는 방법은 공복 시간을 길게 가져가는 거예요. 제가 어저께 저녁 5시 반에 먹었으니까 지금 오전 이런 거 조금 먹긴 했지만 그래도 음식은 안 먹었잖아요. 그래서 저는 제 첫 끼를 언제 먹냐면 한 11시, 12시에서 배가 꼬르륵 소리가 계속 나면 언제부터 꼬르륵 소리 나냐면 오전 한 9시 되면 그때부터 꼬르륵 소리 나요. 그러면 한 2시간에서 3시간 더 기다렸다가 그때 첫 끼를 먹어요.
Consider President Biden's $2 trillion plan to rebuild the nation's infrastructure will also
되게 맛있다.
the nation's economy. Recently joins us.
너무 맛있어.
Look at whether how she can get this out.
여러분 되게 맛있는 건 조금만 드세요. 알았죠? 되게 맛있는 건 조금만 먹고 적당히 맛있는 거 많이 드세요.
Biden spending plan would introduce a profound change to the U.S. economy. First, a 4-decade-long decline in government investment that began in the Reagan years. Here's the graph to look at. Government investment in the economy has fallen steadily from above 1% of the economy back in the 1980s to around 0.7% now. Has been kind of stagnant. It only pops briefly with spending bills after recessions. President Biden highlighted this decline in his speech yesterday.
Fall back. The rest of the world is closing in fast. We can't allow this to continue. American Jobs Plan is the biggest increase in our federal non-defense research and development spending on record.
Daniel Yergin's his book, Commanding Heights, chronicled the way economic leadership swings back and forth between companies from the private sector and government. Told me yesterday, quote, the frontier between government and the private sector is never fixed, and it's always shifting. Biden certainly is pushing out the boundary of government again to the economy. Several economists worry that the amount of spending on top of the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill and the recovering economy would crowd out private investment. John Riding from Green Capital says, we're going to have crowding out. That's what happens with an economy that gets to full capacity and then you demand more money. Steel analysts at the Federal Budget Model tell me that the spending will raise the level of wages by 0.2% over a 10-year period and GDP by 0.3%. That's the level. But reduce capital spending overall by 0.1%. Now, a 2016 study from the Congressional Budget Office estimates a 5% return on productive government investment. Returns 5%. But the debate's already begun about how much of the spending in this bill, with its expanded definition of infrastructure, will end up being productive. Joe? Yeah.
Exactly. What was that phrase? Productive. Let's not. All right. Thank you, Steve.
No, I think that's the debate, Joe. I think
No,
we should go there.
I wasn't going to go there in terms of calling that an oxymoron. There are things that the government is obviously very necessary for, obviously. But there, over the years and years and years of just watching things happen, there are things that it's not great at. And that's the argument of our time, Steve, of what is more efficient capital, the private sector, where you need to, watch your P's and Q's and profit versus where no one's really minding the store. And it's just,
I would just argue, Joe, that
$5,000 toilet seats and, all the stuff we've seen in the past.
right. I would just, you can say 115 for roads and bridges, but it's fair to have a more expanded view of infrastructure. I mean,
The idea of spending money on airports, on schools, on public transportation, that's there. The question becomes when you start putting in a bill like this, not that it's the wrong priority, but a bill like this, $400 million for senior care. And then there's the debate, I know where you stand on it, whether or not green energy ought to be an infrastructure priority. Not that it's not infrastructure.
Right, but and we're talking about the effective use of capital, and right now, a lot of the costs associated with that transition are not as economically favorable of the way we do it now. So is that the right way to force feed it to the grid, to force feed it to the EV spend with all the subsidies? Doesn't make sense without any of the subsidies. Is that the right way to spend this really hard-won capital that we have no extra of right now with everything else we're trying to do?
Return depends upon the value you put upon attacking or repairing those issues.
Well, there you go.
And if you don't see the return there, if you don't see the issues and don't embrace
마음 놓고 운동하면 이 정도 강도로 운동하면 한 3시간을 해야 한 실컷 하는 것 같아요. 그러니까 이렇게 저강도로 운동하면 한 3시간을 해야 실컷 하는 것 같아요.
Anyway, we want it. I know that. It's a good thing. Thank you. We will we'll be with you. We'll be with you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. When we come back, former SEC Chairman
젊으신 분들은 좀 강도 좀 올리고 짧게 한 45분, 50분 안에 끝내세요. 근데 저는 저는 그렇게 하는 것보다 이렇게 저강도로 길게 하는 게 저 몸한테 나은 것 같아요. 고강도로 짧게 하면 막 여기저기 아프더라고요. 저는 몸 좋아지려면 저강도로 길게 합니다. 고강도로 짧게는 이제 못하겠어요. 왜냐면 고강도로 짧게 하면 그 다음날 몸이 너무 안 좋아요. 아파요. 운동할 때는 몰라요. 아드레날린이 많이 나와서. 근데 끝나고 나서 한 4시간 지나고 그때부터 몸이 막 여기저기 관절이 아프죠. 그러면 안 되죠. 이게 저강도로 천천히 길게 하는 게 운동 끝나고도 하루 종일 여기저기 안 아프고 좋아요. 옛날에 언제야 2008년도 9년도 진짜 시험 나가고 그럴 때는 운동을 아무리 하고 싶어도 시간이 없어서 못했어요. 일을 막 엄청 많이 하니까. 근데 요새는 운동을 엄청 많이 할 수 있는 시간이 있는데 몸이 안 돼서 못해요. 여러분 이게 될 땐 요게 안 되고 요게 되면 요게 안 돼요. 그래서 적당히 하고 싶은 걸 하세요. 내가 모든 걸 다 이루고 나서 해야 되겠다 그러다가 하려고 그럴 때 죽는 사람들이 많이 있더라고요. 아시죠? 적당히 먹고 싶은 거 좀 먹고 적당히 하고 싶은 거 좀 하세요. 천당을 가려고 해도 일단 먹고 싶은 거 먹고 가는 게 낫지 않아요?
all this Archegos news hit the tape, what your reaction was, what your reaction would have been if you were sitting back in the seat running the SEC.
Well, Andrew, thank you for having me on. Let me first say thank you for your attention, promotions, and literacy. Extremely important. And on Archegos, look, I'm not gonna jump ahead of the people who are now in that seat because they're very competent. They know what's going on. But more generally, a situation like this, you have to ask yourself, okay, how did these positions get put on, and why did they keep each other around so abruptly? What was this? That's what people will be looking at, and they're complex. And they're complex when a single institution is involved. What I see is a fair amount of complexity here because from news reports you can tell there are multiple institutions. And ongoing with that will be something that the folks at the SEC and the folks at the banking regulators will want to know. And I'm sure that each of these institutions, risk managers, and risk control systems are asking those questions internally.
So Jay,
probably as we speak.
Jay, do you think though, there's a couple issues here. One is that family offices, should they require more disclosure? There is some disclosure that's required that it appears that they were not participating in, and that many actually don't. So that's one issue on the table. There's an issue of things like total return swaps, which again create disclosure problems because nobody seems to know exactly what, how large a position is being built. And then there's this third issue of multiple prime brokers effectively lending, creating leverage, potentially on the same instruments without knowing what the other one is doing. How do we fix that?
Let me speak generally, Andrew, about information that's available in the marketplace. What I think we've seen over the last months or so with some of the so-called meme stocks and the situation is we do need to look at a modernization of the information. For example, aggregate short positions should be 2 weeks delayed. In the case of positions that people are using so-called 13F reports for, those are quite delayed, and people are not using those reports for their intended purposes, for other purposes, but are we best serving those other purposes? Now, on swaps, Dodd-Frank, Title VII of Dodd-Frank put in place a swap regulatory regime. It took a long time for all of the regulators to get together and get that into place. That actually comes into effect this November, and there will be much more reporting to the SEC and other authorities, the CFTC, around positions in swaps. How much capital, margining, how assets are segregated and the like. So that is on the come. But yeah, you're right to ask these questions too. We should always be looking to modernize our disclosure system.
Were you surprised that certain banks were able to get out of these positions relatively unscathed, and yet others, like a Credit Suisse and Nomura, seem to be materially more challenged?
Look, I don't know enough about what was going on in these places to give you insight here. But what I did say at the outset, I think you need to keep your eye on here is when you have multiple parties involved in a situation like this, it does become more complex. Each party is acting in its own interest. They're supposed to do that, but it has an aggregate effect.
I want to touch on financial literacy in just a moment, but I want to get your thoughts on two other issues real quick if I could. One is you and I have talked about Bitcoin for a very long time. You now have more and more banks offering it either through a Galaxy, Galaxy Digital kind of situation, or through a Grayscale or something else. Goldman Sachs planning to do something similar. None of this yet has been regulated in a meaningful way. It feels like the SEC, at least under your watch, had decided, not to necessarily take a position on it. At what point do you think the regulators will have to take a position, if you will?
Well, Andrew, it depends on the character of the particular instrument you're discussing. Bitcoin was decided to be not a security before the time it got to the SEC. And therefore, the SEC's jurisdiction over Bitcoin was rather indirect. And its integration into the securities regulatory architecture. It does not mean we should
should not be regulated. In fact, where digital assets land at the end of the day, which is very much a wide-ranging question, as you can tell from just of Joe and Becky and many guests you have on, will be driven in part by regulation, both domestic and international. And I expect, I'm speaking as a citizen now, I expect that regulation will come in this area, both directly and indirectly, whether it's through how these are held at banks or securities accounts, taxation, and the like. I mean, we will see this regulatory environment involved, but it involves many different regulators, domestic and abroad.
Right. And then before we hit financial regulation, just want to ask you quickly about SPACs. We've seen that market really become challenged, frankly, in the past couple of weeks after what was such a run. The SEC coming out with some guidance and questions about SPACs just in the past, I think now 48 hours. Curious what kinds of rules and regulations you think may be on the come, if you will.
Well, look, I commend the SEC staff for the time I was there and since I've left, jumping on this and trying to communicate to the investing public. The sophisticated investing public understands how SPACs are different from traditional IPOs. You had a good article yesterday saying, are we really at the alignment of interest here when you have the de-SPACing transaction? If you're a retail investor buying into the securities at the time of the de-SPACing transaction, are the sponsors and the other institutional investors, are they in there with you for the long haul, or are they in there quickly? Now, that's a different dynamic in SPACs, but it's going back to the it's an age-old finance equation. I'm getting into this. Am I getting into it side by side with the people who know more than me and who are selling to me, or am I getting into it and they're getting out? Those are two very different investments.
But to that point, just on SPACs for one thing, but it goes to financial literacy in some ways. You know, to understand a SPAC, or to even understand, for example, the dilution of a SPAC. You know, most people look at the filings on a SPAC. It can take you 6 hours to undo the math between how much the sponsor is getting as the promote, how much the warrants are distributing. At the time that the $10 that people are paying for a SPAC typically turn into about $6.41. But most people, honestly, you know, even professionals, this is a very hard thing. The question is why the SEC and other regulators don't force, you know, very clear math on the page and just say it in English so that people can understand what's happening. Otherwise, you look through the spine, you can't even find half this information unless you really know what you're looking for.
Well, I think.
그래서 여러분 주말에
To say that you could simplify
주말에
into a few paragraphs.
그러니까 몸이 빨리 좋아지고 싶으신 분들은 주말에 이런 식으로 한번 해보세요.
But you are driving at the right issues. Those are the questions that what is happening
많이
to the overall
알았죠?
capital structure.
많이 한번 해보세요. 여러분 이
Let it be very simple. If you don't understand that, you shouldn't be investing in this type of.
우리 같은 일반인은 빨리 좋아지려면 많이 하는 비결밖에 없어요. 굉장히 무게를 많이 드는 사람 많이 안 해도 되는데 우리 같은
Jay, I wanted to speak directly about this great op-ed you have today, focusing on the importance of financial education for the next generation, and just what we as a country need to do, because it's not, you know, this disclosure is part of it, but also being able to understand the disclosures is very meaningful.
Well, look, Andrew, it is so important for people to understand early that financial decision making is going to be part of your life. Usually it comes in the form of credit rather than investing out of the box, whether it's student loans, car loans, and the like. Understanding that those decisions are going to be part of your life and to make better decisions to look at fees, costs, and expenses to minimize those. And turning to investing, look, I think we've seen a lot. Jim Cramer's comments on this, with the volatility that we've seen, with the new stocks and the markets, I hope that the increase in investing that we've seen, people don't pull back as a result of this volatility and the losses that it causes you. People need to invest for the long term. You've decided that you have individual responsibility for your retirement in America, and I just encourage people to learn early, get started early. And when we get town halls when I was chair of the FCC, the one thing that everybody said to me was, I wish I knew more earlier, and I wish I got started more earlier. I got started investing earlier.
So how are we gonna do that?
Work.
What's one thing you would do?
Well, my op-ed says, hey, grandparents, you pick up so many of the pieces, you do so many things. I was lucky enough that my grandparents took the time to teach me about savings, credit, and eventually the basics of investing. Not the complicated stuff, but invest for the long term. Watch taxes, watch fees, have a balanced portfolio, think about diversification. So that's one thing. Start at home. You don't want children to be afraid of credit. And we should have it in the schools. Look, investing, understanding your connection to the financial community is such an important part of American life. My own idea is, hey, let's give everything a bank account. Get them started.
Jay, we very much appreciate you joining us this morning, and we should encourage everybody to read Jay's piece. You can do it on cbc.com/investinyu. You should also note that NBC Universal and Comcast Ventures are investors in Acorns, which is a backer of this literacy program. Jay, great to see you. Thanks so very, very much.
Thanks, Andrew. And happy birthday to your grandmother.
Thank you. It's my mother's birthday today, so happy birthday to my mother.
저 사람
My grandmother turned 103 back in February, but not a joke. My mother was born on April 1st.
저 사람 증조 할머니가 만으로 103살이래요. 야, 대단하다. 만으로 103살. 만으로 103살.
About the changes that the MLB has made, the return of fans, and the reopening just of states. Up next, the CEO of Frontier Air on the company's first day of trading on the NASDAQ. Swap box coming right back.
Time now for today's athletic trivia question. What Dow component was originally known as Blue Ribbon Sports? The answer when CNBC Squawk Box continues.
우와. 오. 우와. 오늘 운동. 오늘 운동 충분히 해서 되게 좋다. 기분이 너무 좋아요. 운동을 충분히 해서 너무 좋습니다. 운동을 충분히 해서 좋고 날씨도 좋고 저의 주식 계좌도 올라가서 좋고 비즈니스도 다시 또 해서 좋고 겨울에 추워서 안 왔던 고객들도 다시 돌아와서 저한테 돈 줘서 좋고 맛있는 거 사 먹을 돈 생겨서 좋고 여러분 만사가 좋네. 겨울에 여러분 여기 토론토 열지 말래서 영하 20-30도 되니까 웬만하신 분들은 못 오더라고요. 지금은 밖에서 수업해서 좀 많이 돌아왔어요. 그래서 많이 돌아와서 근데 이제 신규 고객은 못 받아요. 꽉 찼어요. 이제 바빠서 못 해요. 신규 고객은 꽉 차서 못 합니다. 바쁩니다. 저는 신규 고객이 트레이닝 비용이 얼마예요? 그러면 저는 제 관심 받기예요. 저한테는 가격을 물어보는 사람들하고는 전 별로 얘기를 안 해요. 얼마냐고 물어보면 저는 별로 얘기를 안 해요. 아니 할 건데 가격이 무슨 상관이 있어요. 그래서 저는 그러니까 신규 고객 할 시간도 없지만 혹시라도 신규 고객이 할 거라면 가격을 물어보는 사람하고는 저는 대화를 별로 안 합니다.
Now the answer to today's Aflac trivia question. What component was originally known as Blue Ribbon Sports? The answer, Nike.
막 경찰이나 은퇴한 군인들 저한테 꼭 도움이 필요하신 분들은 제가 무료로 해드리는 경우들도 있어요. 나한테 도움이 꼭 필요하니까.
Red Sox chairman Tom Warner gives us a preview of MLB's opening day. Tom Friedman and Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm will talk about the president's infrastructure plan. And Compass CEO Robert Reffkin joins us ahead of that company's debut on the New York Stock Exchange. Big lineup still to come this morning. Right now, though, as we head to a quick break, let's take a check on the futures.
다음에는 전체를 12mm로 잘라야지 이게 좀 이상해. 제가 잘랐더니. 제가 잘랐더니 좀 이상합니다. 백신 맞아갖고 한국 가면 자가격리 안 해도 된다 그러면 백신 맞고 한국 바로 갈게요. 근데 백신 맞아도 자가격리 해야 된다 그러면 안 맞을래요 지금. 백신을 맞았는데 자가격리 안 해도 된다 그러면 저는 맞고 바로 한국을 가겠습니다. 족발 먹어야지 가서. 진짜 한 2년치 족발은 먹고 올게요. 그래서 족발이 한 1, 2년 동안 생각이 안 나게. 인연치 족발을 먹고 와야지. 1인 2족발 가능하실 때는 1인 그러니까 저 장충동 가서 진짜로 특대 제가 혼자 2개 먹을 수 있어. 근데 먹을 수는 있겠는데 불편할 것 같은데 그렇게 많이 먹으면 딱 특대 하나 먹으면 딱 좋을 것 같아요. 특대를 2개를 먹을 수는 있을 것 같은데 그러면 다른 거 못 먹잖아요. 가서 저는 족발 특대나 그 다음에 족발 특대랑 그 다음에 저는 그 뭐야 족발 특대
Welcome back to Squawk Box. I'm Dominic
그리고
here with your market minute as the quarter has ground down to a close. We want to call
그
your
뭐야
attention to some of the
족발
trends
특대
developing within the markets in this first quarter of 2021. If you look at the S&P 500, the Dow, and the Nasdaq, remember, at the S&P 500 came within just touching distance.
그 뭐야
Just of 4,000.
비
Right now,
쟁반국수
Dow Industrial's up
그리고
8% on a quarter
그
year-to-date
뭐지
basis. the S&P up around 6% and the
그
Nasdaq
파전.
lagging just about
막걸리
9%
딱.
gains over the Nasdaq Composite. With regard to the real outperformers that we've seen, it has been some of the more deeper, cyclical, economically sensitive, value-type trades that have really outperformed so far. Energy is up nearly 30% as a sector. The financials up 15%. Interest rates a key part of that move, and industrials up 11% as well. So some of the beaten up names really outperforming so far in 2021. And it's April Fool's Day, but it's no joke if I told you that technology was one of the worst performing sectors so far in this young 2021. Consumer staples only up 1%, technology up a very modest 3%, and utilities up 2% as well. And let's call your attention to 4 stocks in the pre-market that are on the move because of analyst actions. Take a look at Facebook, getting some positive commentary from analysts at Deutsche Bank as well as Wolf Research, up 1% there. Uber, Jefferies calls it their top reopening play, so Uber shares up about almost 2%. Fisker, analysts at Barclays think it's cheap relative to Tesla, and then one down one. Goldman Sachs off about 0.75%. Analysts there, Andrew, at UBS say Goldman is already reflecting a strong growth profile, so maybe more balanced with regard to risk reward. So Goldman shares, after a nice run, down about 0.75% in the pre-market trading. If you're all set, things back over.
Thank you, my friend. Great to see you, Dom. Happy April Fool's Day.
Likewise, Mr. Sorkin.
Coming up, we'll return. Frontier Airlines taking a flight at the NASDAQ today. We're going to speak to its CEO of the state of the industry and what the low-cost carrier expects summer travel to look like. Check out the futures right now, 2 hours before the big open. We're in the green across the board now, about 61 points. NASDAQ up about 136 points. S&P 500 open 17 points higher. We're back after this.
저 술 안 먹어요. 안 취해요. 안 먹어. 술 안 먹. 술을 한 잔, 반 잔이나 한 잔 먹는다니까 무슨. 저 술 안 취해요. 안 먹어요. 술을 안 먹어. 술이 취하면 독이에요. 술을 한 잔 먹으면 약인데, 그 음식인데 많이 먹으면 그 독이에요. 독. 아니 왜 내가 돈을 지불하고 내 몸에 독을 써? 저는 취할 만큼 안 먹어요. 어렸을 때 다 먹었어요, 여러분. 딱 20대 초반에 그런 거 끝내야죠. (20대) 초반 한두 잔 먹는다니까. 한두 잔. 그 다음날 운동해야 되는데 운동 뭐 머리도 아프고 불편하잖아요. 막걸리 한 잔. 막걸리는 그거 주잖아요. 맥주컵 그런 거 뭐 아니면 뭐 하여튼 막걸리는 한 얼마큼 먹으면 좋냐? 한 125ml에서 250ml에서 500ml 정도 먹으면 될 것 같아요. 그 이상 먹으면 이제 그 다음날 운동할 때 불편하죠. 그 다음날 막걸리 병으로 된 거 모르겠어요. 하여튼 막걸리 한테 그 전에 지난번에 갔을 때 먹었을 때 설탕 많이 들어서 전통 막걸리 한 250ml에서 500ml 정도 먹으면 500이면 네, 반 리터. 네, 그 정도면 뭐 충분하지 않을까요? 그러니까 술을 맛으로 먹어야지 왜 그거를 취할 때까지 먹어요.
Welcome back, everybody. Low-cost carrier Frontier Airlines going public today, trading under the ticker ULCC. Frontier withdrew plans to debut over the summer before filing again in
Ay,
March.
ay.
The IPO coming as flight passengers numbers continue to rebound. The number of passengers going through TSA over 1 million for 21 days in a row now. That is by far the longest stretch we've seen since this pandemic began over a year ago. Joining us right now is Barry Biffle, President and CEO of Frontier Airlines. And Barry, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
So let's talk about this IPO, what it means and why now. What do you think so far?
Well, look, people love the story, they love the company, and we're better positioned than most companies as the leisure recovery comes back. And the time is now because America's reopening, and we're best positioned to exploit all that demand that's been up.
You are seeing a return. We've heard that prices are going to be going up, that more people are flying, and that people are starting to feel better, especially as the vaccines really roll out across the country. What have you seen most recently, just in terms of passenger bookings and the travel that's going through on Frontier?
Well, look, we're seeing the vaccine unlock that demand as everyone has expected. And when we look at the month of March,
아, 좋습니다. 이 정도 했으면 충분히 한 것 같아.
demand picture, but it's just getting going.
아, 오늘 상당히 운동에 만족합니다.
Quarantine restriction is gone, and by Memorial Day,
상당히 오늘 상당히 오늘 만족해요.
What can you tell me in terms of the bookings?
지금 얼마큼 했어요?
What is it now versus a month ago?
2시간 10분, 2시간 하니까
but it's up considerably versus a few months ago. January, February was very low at the height of the pandemic, but
자,
we've seen
오늘
that
상당히
chip away at the fear of flying, if you will, and air travel, and people are getting back out.
상당히 만족합니다 오늘.
Demand is what's driving us to meet that for a positive now.
Barry, the IPO priced at the low end of the expected range at $19.
야, 장난 아니다 진짜.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but look, there's been a lot of things going on in the market lately, but I can just tell you that people are excited about the story.
테슬라 다시 700 가까이 갈라 그러고.
We're America's greenest airline, and we're positioned a lot differently than a lot of other.
여러분들 보실래요? 관심 종목?
Premier green brands like Tesla, Patagonia, and Frontier. What really differentiates us and makes us a better play is that we're the lowest cost for the consumer and the best for your wallet.
제가 보고 있는 관심 종목이에요, 관심 종목. 여러분들 보실래요? 관심 종목?
Based on what metrics?
Based on CO2, basically 97 miles per gallon per passenger or per seat, and that compares to the industry that's in the 60s. So it's considerably much more efficient.
What do you guys do differently?
All types of things. We use the latest technology, modern aircraft. The Airbus Neo is over half of our fleet, but we fly it more efficiently, and just every way that we operate the airline, we're very conscious about how little fuel we can get away with.
That's a pretty big differential.
삼성전자 사고 싶어요. 삼성이 여기 있으면 제가 애플 팔아서 삼성 살 거예요.
Carriers averages.
삼성이 여기 있으면 애플을 팔아서 삼성을 사고
I
싶어요.
understand you might be flying a larger fleet using these newer jets, but how do you fly them more efficiently than other people do?
Well, everything from avoiding congested times, congested airports. For example, we don't have as much food and beverage on board as you might normally expect. We have half the galley cars.
오늘
And even last week, we
어떻게?
just introduced new Recaro seats that are 1,000 pounds less per aircraft. And just that alone saves us $30,000 in fuel each year per airplane. So we're just
애플이
always
있어요.
looking
저
to
남들
make
가지고 있는 거 다
the
있어요.
aircraft lighter, and then how we actually
남들
operate
가지고 있는 거 다
to
있어요.
burn
남들
less
가지고
fuel.
있는 거.
Because there's many ways to get you from A to B, but how
남들 가지고 있는 거 다 있어요.
differentiates us, and I think it really drives home all of the things that we do from an efficiency perspective that not only makes us lowest ex-fuel cost in 2019, but also lowest from a fuel cost as well.
남들 가지고 있는 거 다 가지고 있어요.
How much of your business is people going on vacation versus
근데
business
저는
travelers?
애플이니까 사람들 많이 써서 가지고 있지.
That's right.
배당도 약간 주고. 저는 삼성을 여기서 살 수 있으면 전 애플을 팔아서 삼성을 사고 싶어요.
Are you using this
한국 갈 때 돈 조금 가져가서 삼성 키움증권에 계좌 열어갖고 삼성 좀 사고 살 거예요.
For others, like United, just said that they're going to be flying between JFK and California again. That's really tough to get into that. They have the opportunity to get some of those slots there that they hadn't been able to have for several years at this point. Are you looking to expand anywhere?
We're growing 10 to 15% every year.
장난
And, our fleet
아니구나.
growth for the next 7 years is pretty set. We'll actually
되게 많이
maybe
올랐네.
add some more. But we're always looking to grow. That's one of the things that makes us a great company.
New routes though, or more
of course,
planes
of
on the
course.
existing routes?
A little bit
So
of
the-
both, but a lot more routes than
자,
existing
그러면
flights on existing routes.
야, 장난 아니다.
What do you worry about? I mean, things are looking good if these vaccines continue to roll out like this. Are you concerned about a rise in COVID again? We heard today about France shutting down for another 3 weeks, and I realize you're not flying internationally, but do you worry about potentially a fourth wave here in the United States? Do you worry about oil prices continuing to climb if you don't see something like that?
Well, look, I mean, you're fortunate here in the United States. We're just way ahead of most of the world from a vaccine perspective, so I don't worry about another wave so much. I think the biggest challenge we have on a near-term basis, Becky, is that when you travel around the U.S., I've experienced this over the last 6 to 8 weeks. You go to check into a hotel, you try to get service at a restaurant, everyone's understaffed. So I think the recovery has really caught people off guard at how fast it's coming back. As far as oil prices, back to being America's greenest airline, we drink less fuel, so we're much less immune to the shocks of
저는 박세익 전무님의 말씀에 따라서 주식으로 버는 돈을 땅에 묻을 겁니다, 올해.
It's great to see your success. At the same
주식으로
time,
버는
I
돈을
have
땅에
to ask,
묻으려고 생각을 하고 있어요.
It's been an issue for the past year. Taxpayers effectively help bail you out.
아니 주식 다 올랐죠. 작년에 주식 떨어진 사람이 어딨어요. 작년에 산 게.
In retrospect, given the fact that here you are today, going public, and frankly, whether the taxpayers should have gotten more.
제 계좌를 한번
for the
볼까요
support
오늘?
that they
자,
provided
보겠습니다.
for
제
you
계좌를.
and clearly,
자, 이게 안 보이죠? 네,
the
좋아요.
wealth that will be created by
계좌 한번 볼게요. 어떻게
executives of the
됐나.
company and investors in the company.
Look, thanks, Andrew, and I kind of expected this. I saw your article.
계좌 잘 안 봐요. 그 뭐야.
But look, great news here
단타 칠
is
때만
the
봐요.
American
단타 칠 때.
taxpayer plan.
단타.
We're
막
back
폭락하면
flying,
단타
we're back
가끔
hiring.
칩니다.
Every airplane that we brought
지난주
in,
금요일
we
같은
have
날.
over 100 Team Frontier members
자,
come in.
그러면
So,
오늘 이렇게
great
해서
news, the CARES Act worked.
이렇게.
We're here, the industry's
이렇게
here,
해서
and
이렇게
we're
보면
here to support the economy coming back. But more importantly, look, we'll pay every penny of that loan back plus interest.
그냥
And you got to remember,
아니 화 안 내. 화 안 내. 화 안 내.
got stock warrants in Frontier.
그러니까
And so
아니
today,
주식으로
by IPO,
떨어질 게
guess
뭐가
what?
있어요.
We're optimizing that return for an investment for the
사고
taxpayer.
가만 냅두면
We're gonna be
오르지.
more excited about it.
그러니까
Barry, I want to thank you for your time today, and congratulations once again.
사갖고 가만 냅두면 오를 회사를 사서 쌀 때 사서 가지고 있으면 오른다. 그러면 될 것 같아요.
Boston Red Sox Chairman Tom Warner is going to join us to discuss the upcoming season, the reopening of states, and the business of baseball. We've also got a programming note. The equity markets will be closed for Good Friday's holiday, but Squawk Box will be open for business. It is Jobs Friday, and we have a great lineup leading up to the big number that's going to happen at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, of course, tomorrow. We want you to join us for our regularly scheduled show from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Squawk returns right after this.
지난주 금요일에 단타로 좀 샀거든요. 많이 떨어져서 오늘 조금 팔을까 생각하고 있어요. 일단 모르겠습니다. 일단은 제가 오늘의 영상을 찍고 여러분 끝까지 시청해주신 여러분 감사하고요. So thanks for watching today. I hope you guys have a great day, great afternoon, and great evening. Okay. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. Thank you. 자 여러분 감사합니다. 여러분 자 포징 한번 잡고 끝낼까요, 세연님? 자. 세연님 포징 한번 잡고 끝내겠습니다. 세연님 자 우리 세연님이 나날이 굉장히 괜찮은 사람이 되어가고 있어서 포징 한번 하죠. 자 여러분 포징을 하도록 하겠습니다. 아니 꼭 세연님한테만 한 거 아니야. 저를 위해서 하는 거예요. 제가 재밌어서 좋아서 몸 좀 보려고. 어차피 오늘의 영상 이렇게 찍을 건데. 그래서 지금 다이어트 하고 있어요. 다이어트. 자, 다이어트 하고 있습니다, 여러분. 좀 있으면 이게 밖에 걸어다니기 때문에 이 홍해를 가르겠습니다. 여기 요 라인을. 그래서 다이어트 하고 있어요. 아시죠? 여러분도 건강하시기 바랍니다. 안녕.